Hey there everybody, Eric from Outer Limitless coming at you today with another video. Now in today's video I'm here to talk to you about two different Kizer knives. First is the Kizer Super Bad and next is the Kizer Super Bad. Now when I say that we are going to look at both of these Kizer Super Bads, the reason is that there are two distinctly different models. Now generally speaking there are a lot of similarities. The designer, the overall handle shape, the overall general size, the steel. But at that is pretty much where this ends. So in today's video, I will be taking a look at both of these to figure out which one of them is badass and which one's just kind of bad. And if you're interested in seeing a little bit more about what I'm talking about, do me a favor, stay tuned. So here we have both versions of the Kizer Knives Super Bad. These are a Mikael Williamson design in VG10. So a nice quality blade in VG10 with G10 handle scales. Now there are a couple of different colors. These are in the green and black, so both very similar in terms of the overall finish. The overall length of the drop point design is 8.75 inches with a 4.75 inch blade and a 3.75 inch cutting edge. This is 0.18 inches thick, a drop point design with a hollow grind, again VG10 with that nice stonewash finish. And here the Recurve Bowie, so again with that stonewash VG10 finish, the G10 handle scales, an overall length of 8.75 inches with a 4.75 inch blade length, 3.75 inch cutting edge, and that 0.18 inch thick stock. Now again, this has a couple of different grinds, so a hollow grind, and then this transition to a flat grind, so a sort of multi-purpose knife with a number of different little features in here. Overall, I'm curious to see between these two shapes which one's going to perform better. So taking a look at the sheath, you will notice on both of these models that they look fairly similar. Now they are generally speaking constructed exactly the same. So all the exact same features, same kydex weight, overall shape and rivet construction. So in that regard, very similar. But one thing that I did note is that here on the Recurve Bowie, a reasonably positive click, but not a super loud snap. But here on the drop point, it has that really strong and just positive, good sounding click. For me and kydex, when you hear that, you know it's secure. Now there is a little bit of rattle in there, not too bad, but that click has me very encouraged. Now back again to the Recurve Bowie, even though you don't get that click, it does seem to be just a little bit tighter with no rattle. I don't have any fear that this is going to fall out. Now one thing that is a little bit difficult is the fact that this clip can only be positioned in the upright position. So in that regard, you need to carry this knife vertically. For me personally, in a knife this size, I would like to have it horizontal and mounted on my weak side for a cross draw. You can't do that with this current belt loop. But taking a look at the overall pattern, it does appear as though the spacing on this is exact for the tech lock style, sort of blade tech lock. Now again, this will not span all the way from the top to the bottom. The depth of the blade and the sheath is too much to take all four bolts, but you can get two of them in a couple of different positions, so you could conceivably convert this from the standard belt loop that it's provided with to a tech lock, and I would probably do that to carry this in more of a cross draw style. But overall, generally speaking, this kydex is reasonably well done. Now picking up on a detail that somebody else in another review brought up, the fact that if you look at this back piece, this could potentially be ambidextrous, but you would be stuck with the outside piece of the loop kind of sticking out beyond the sheath. So they could have potentially scalloped both sides of it and made that work. That's something you could certainly do on your own if you really cared. Now there is no drainage hole, but not too big of a deal where this is a VG10. I'm not quite so concerned with the overall need for this to drain. Now again, if it's a big deal, you could probably put a little drain hole in here yourself, so just adding a tiny little hole in the bottom there would certainly do. So VG10 generally makes for an excellent kitchen and cooking knife. So in this regard, this super bad lineup here should perform overall pretty well. Now I'm going to use both the drop point and the Bowie to see which one performs a little bit better in these kitchen and cooking tasks. So first the drop point, which has a very natural shape and sweep to the belly for these cutting tasks, and so certainly in that regard, this super bad drop point works very, very well. Nice and smooth, good quality overall slicing capability, and comfortable in the hand. Nicely slices, just so simple, right down and through. Now because this is hollow ground, it does perform very well for these cutting and slicing tasks. And just a little bit more here. With ease, a nice, clean, refined edge definitely does a nice job. And now for the Bowie. This does not have as nice of a belly, so you can see it's a little more awkward when you get down towards the sort of flat part of the knife. Now here you have a hollow ground section, and here is more of a flat ground section. So when you approach from an angle, you are into that flat ground section. So getting into it here, that does work very nice. So I'll test this section of the blade, which seems to perform extremely well. It's actually a good, comfortable angle. But then down here, it just gets a little awkward. And because of the point at the transition between the grinds, you really kind of bottom out a little bit and can't make a complete cut. But if you are working more towards the tip, it definitely works. And again, changing angles so you can see what I'm saying. Going at an angle definitely works well. But then when you get more towards the, I'd say, flatter part and hollow grind, you do kind of bottom out, which doesn't allow you to make a complete cut. So you kind of need to work with this at a slightly different angle when you're approaching what you're cutting. So a little bit of a different method between these two knives. But just to finish up here with the Bowie, it definitely does a nice job and has an excellent edge. So it's not a comfort thing, it's not an edge thing. It's basically a geometry thing where the geometry of these two grinds are different. So you approach your work slightly different depending on what you're trying to do. Now here you'll see me using the super bad knives out in the field. I'm not the most tactical person, but I definitely enjoy a nice blade for the wilderness application, and I'm hoping that these Kizer Super Bads are going to perform very well. So getting into some testing, I always find that batoning is a great test of a knife for a number of different reasons. First is, personally, I just enjoy splitting wood. I like using my knives to process wood for a fire, and that's the case here with these Super Bad knives. So a batoning task is a good overall test of the quality of the steel between its ability to split the wood and the shape and geometry of the knife, the shock in the handle, and just how it feels in the hands. But also when testing the quality of the steel, the overall edge retention, and the ability for the blade to sustain heavy blows, batoning down through the wood. I feel as though if you're going to have a problem with a knife, chances are you're going to find out in a batoning task. So here you'll see as I split down through the wood, many of the blows actually striking directly on the tip of the knife. Now if there was going to be a problem, I feel as though you would find it by hammering so hard right on the tip of that knife. But generally speaking, here you'll see that the Super Bad drop point performed very well, blowing down through the wood, had absolutely no problems whatsoever with the quality of the steel, and did the work mighty fine. And getting here into the Super Bad Recurve Bow Ii, very, very similar in terms of the overall performance of the knife. With this blade being the exact same length, this did perform the work mighty well. But the Recurve Bow Ii is just a little bit more stout in the tip, a slightly different shape from the drop point, but both of these knives performed very well in these batoning tasks. And very similar to the drop point here on the Recurve Bowie, many strikes over and over and over again right on the tip of that blade, but no problem with the steel, no worries of damaging the knife, and this performed very well in these batoning tasks. Now, comfort in the hand is always an important thing. Although Kizer fixed blade knives oftentimes have slightly smaller handles, they are still comfortable for me. Even with a large size hand, I do enjoy the overall fit of these handles in my hand while performing these carving tasks. So here with the drop point, the belly on this blade is excellent, absolutely perfect for delicate, detailed little curls. I felt as though the edge geometry was perfect to find that edge with ease, perform this work in a nice controlled fashion, and the knife is very comfortable in the hand. The hollow grind in VG10 performed extremely well, nice and quality, fine, refined curls. I very much enjoyed the drop point while carving these feather sticks. And now getting into the Recurve Bow Ii, again very similar in the hand. A slightly different shape from the drop point, where the drop point has a little bit of a thumb ramp, this Recurve Bow Ii does not. Both are equally comfortable in the hand, however I do need to say that the drop point was a little bit more comfortable overall due to the little scallop in the top of the spine. But getting to work here with the Recurve Bow Ii, it does perform overall pretty well, but the shape of the blade is a little bit awkward for carving. Where there's a dual grind and a weird geometry where the two come together, you need to pay very close attention to your overall technique to make sure the blade runs down the wood from the top all the way to the bottom. Now here you'll see I am trying to force the blade through the wood with that hollow ground section right on the bottom of the blade. It does perform very well, but it is very short in overall length, so you need to use a little more muscle than finesse, and for that the curls aren't necessarily as refined as with the drop point. But that's not to say that this Recurve Bow Ii can't perform the work. You'll see here that I was able to make a mighty fine feather stick overall. And now taking a look at both side by side, on the left the Recurve Bow Ii and on the right the drop point. But if I had to give it to one of them, it would be the drop point. So moving on now to some basic stabbing tasks. Generally speaking, these knives performed close to equal, but here I am using the drop point for these stabbing tasks, stabbing down into the wood, using my thumb on top of the blade for a good positive lockup, in addition to the finger guard up close to the blade.
Generally speaking, not bad, but just a little bit of a hot spot in the underside of my thumb here.
Now, even though this knife does have just a little bit of a hot spot, overall it doesn't bother me. And getting into the Recurve Bow Ii, very, very similar overall to the drop point. Now again, the exact same handles, so it's not surprising that this knife performed very similar to the drop point. Driving down into the wood, I do have good overall penetration.
This feels exactly the same on my thumb, just that little bit of a hot spot, but I do feel as though I'm getting a little bit of a better overall penetration.
And with a little bit better stabbing overall, I do have to give it here to the Recurve Bow Ii. But both knives again performing well, feeling reasonably good in the hand for these stabbing tasks.
Another good task that I like to use to test the quality of a blade, and especially the steel, is chopping tasks. Now I know this is a small knife, but knives of this size certainly can do some light chopping. So here, taking some hacks at a 2x4, I'm using the drop point to get down into the wood, taking some pretty nice chunks of wood and sending them flying. Even though, again, this knife is not all that large, I feel as though I'm capable of doing some pretty good chopping. And now with the Recurve Bowie, very similar, the exact same test to test the overall quality of the edge and retention after all this use. Now in this case, the Recurve Bowie is not nearly as effective as the drop point. It has a very hard time with that transition in the two blade grinds. And for that reason, I think it performed a little less well in these chopping tasks. You don't have that nice sweep of the belly like you do on the drop point to allow it to penetrate deeper into the wood with every cut. So I had to put a significant amount more work into these chopping tasks with the Recurve Bowie versus the drop point. And even with more work, I feel as though I didn't have nearly the same quality results with the Recurve Bowie as I did with the drop point. The cuts on the drop point were much sharper and much more refined. Getting into that hollow grind on the nice belly, the drop point performed reasonably well in these chopping tasks, and I definitely can't say the same for the Recurve Bowie. Now, even though I did some basic stabbing tasks, I also wanted to test the quality of the steel by doing some tip testing. Now, I know that's a little bit aggressive and is not the most fair test for a knife, but when I'm trying to test them out, what the heck, let's give it a shot. So here, using the drop point in some prying tasks, you'll see I'm getting some decent penetration into the wood. I'm actually prying this over pretty hard, giving it a good overall test. The tip performed plenty fine, no problems with the overall quality of the heat treat. But getting into the Recurve Bowie, this Recurve Bowie is just a little more stout, has a little bit more of a geometry in the front of the knife to allow it to penetrate a little bit deeper into the wood, and I also felt as though it had some less flex in the blade. So I felt as though I could be a little more aggressive, digging a little deeper at this wood, prying a little harder, and really giving this Recurve Bowie a good run for its money. Again, no overall problems with the heat treat, no worries of the tip snapping, and this overall performed pretty well. Now, one of the things you absolutely have to be able to do with a knife is cut and slice, so even though I did some feather sticks, I figured I'd use this for some general slicing tasks. So getting through this 1/2 inch thick rope in both single loop and double loop, the drop point performed extremely well, cutting through this pretty much like butter. But now it's time for the Recurve Bowie. How will this perform? Taking swipe after swipe through this rope, I could not get through with ease. It was more work than I could ever imagine. I was actually pretty shocked. And it's very unfortunate because I like the overall performance of the Recurve Bowie up to this point, but this definitely struggled very much with general slicing tasks. So fighting the rope again and again and again, trying to get this knife to slide through, even with the hollow grind on the bottom of the blade, it struggled. The blade geometry and shape and the type of grind really did not work very well for slicing tasks. And even for a knife that's potentially going to be used in a tactical application, that is very difficult. And just getting back with the drop point to make sure that I'm not crazy, yep, making it through with ease. And a final test of the blade geometry on both of these knives, here using the drop point, taking a piece of hose and trying to slice it off. This isn't the easiest test for a knife, certainly not with a hose of this thickness. But getting on here with the drop point, it managed to perform the work pretty well. Now granted, it took me a couple of passes to get through it here, but generally speaking, it did the work just fine with a nice clean cut. And again, a test for the Recurve Bow Ii. Now at this point, I'm not going to hold my breath. You can see here, this struggled just to make it a little ways through the hose. And getting on it and gripping and ripping and trying to make it through this hose, you can see that the Recurve Bow Ii definitely struggled. I'm even at the point where I don't trust my grip because I'm forcing on the knife so hard. It's just a really sketchy and dangerous situation altogether. Swipe after swipe after swipe on this hose, I just struggled to get through. But finally, I did make it, but not a good test.
So alright guys, there you have it. A quick look at these two Kizer knives. The super bad drop point and the super bad Recurve Bow Ii. Now, as you saw, vastly different results between the two of these. I really want to say that I like this Bowie. The Recurve Bow Ii is definitely cool by design. I like the overall look of it. It's just unique. I like the double grind. I like the concept. The overall general fit in the hand is good, but I just can't get past the performance. Unfortunately, the performance for me and the way that I personally would be using this knife, it just wasn't there. Now I can see that this might work out well for somebody simply looking for some piercing tasks or general cutting tasks that don't require kind of a lot of finesse, something that you're just looking to kind of brute through and just really giving you that sort of pronounced tip there. I can see it working for somebody, just not for me. But the drop point definitely worked very well. I like this knife overall. So a good quality, nice slicing knife. Granted, it has that hollow grind, but it worked well for me. It seems to have held overall a pretty nice edge. The steel looks beautiful. The handle fits pretty well in my hand, as do most of these Kizer knives. And I have to say, generally speaking, I definitely like this knife. For me, definitely the drop point design outperformed the Bowie design by a long shot. To me, that sweeping belly, it's really hard to beat, especially the fact that this is a hollow grind. So when it comes to the overall slicing tasks and even those chopping tasks, this definitely performed fairly well. But this knife, if you look very close, this is going to be very difficult for you to see. But there is just the slightest little bend after that tip testing. Now, I can't completely hold this knife accountable for that. In fact, in my opinion, I much rather this bend than break. A knife that breaks too brittle, definitely a bad situation. But a knife that bends, well, it's a stainless steel. It's not an overly thick spine. I mean, a good quality thick spine, but at the same time, I was torquing on this pretty good. So the fact of the matter that it just bent and didn't break, in my mind, is actually a good thing. And getting into the Recurve Bow Ii, again, this just did not perform for me. Now, you do have the section with the hollow grind there. Overall, I thought this was going to carve pretty well. I was surprised that it didn't. And even more so, I was extremely surprised that it wouldn't slice through the rope or the hose. The hose, yeah, maybe, but the rope, this definitely should have been able to go through. And the problem basically being that the flat spot on the grind is just such a short area that by the time you try to push through, you're kind of hung up a little bit on the point down here where it changes angles and changes grinds. It just didn't quite work. And this knife too, if you look very close, again, very difficult to see. But this too has just the slightest bend to it. So both of these kicking over a little bit. And in the exact same way, as the drop point, I'm glad this bent and didn't break. I'd much rather have a knife that bends than one that breaks. So again, I'd like to say thank you very much to the people at Kizer who have provided these products for review. Again, another nice offering. I very much enjoy them. I think they definitely have their place for somebody, and in the case of the drop point, I very much enjoyed it. So alright guys, thanks for stopping by. I hope you like what you saw. I hope you found it a little bit informative. If you like what you saw, please like, share, and subscribe. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Take care now. I'll see you soon.